24 of the CIS and Senteon webinar series. 24 episodes, and I just counted the other day. I think we're gonna have a total of 29. We have 5 more episodes of the year. Then we take a little holiday break, and we have about 12 more until we completely cover all 500 recommendations from CIS.
Jeez.
Welcome back, Roddy. He started this whole thing with us. He was on episode number 2, right, Roddy?
Feels like it was so long ago.
Our episode was the intro, but Roddy was the first special guest.
Yeah, 24, man. This series can finally rent a car, so that's great.
It's great to have you back, Roddy. Always a pleasure.
Thank
the
you.
Master of creating reoccurring revenue streams.
I love it.
So I hope all of our guests have really taken away value from this. I've been really excited to see the actual cybersecurity students learning from this, learning about CIS and the fundamentals, because we've had a lot of guests come on this series and just kind of talk about how these fundamentals that CIS prioritizes and they prioritize by the controls, right? These controls 1, 2, 3, 4 aren't really done well today, and it's because, in my opinion, and Roddy, maybe you want to share your thoughts on this, but I think marketing and the big shiny EDRs and really just, I want to say, twisted our priorities, a little bit. It's like, hey, we need to do this ASAP. I'm going to skip over the harder manual foundation stuff because this is so important. Do you see that as well?
Yeah, this is something that we've been working on internally at Galactic too, is how do you build a stack, or how do you build a secure practice? Where do you start, right? And we've been debating whether or not it's low-hanging fruit, or do you follow a control framework, or what it is. I mean, there really is no wrong way as long as you're working towards a control framework of some way. But I think it's a reiterative process, so don't just check a box off and never come back and revisit it. Always revisit your controls and what you're doing, because the cool thing about CIS is let's take something I don't know, record all your network assets. I can put that into an Excel spreadsheet and I check that box off, or I can have an automated system that scans my network and populates that into my documentation system, and they both check it. But you want to have a reiterative process where you're constantly improving upon it. So and the marketing side too, the industry is maturing a lot. And I used to say we used to pick vendors by who would go take me to go get a $80 steak and a handshake, and that doesn't. When it comes to risk management and liability, you can't tell a court, hey, he bought me a steak, so I bought his product. That makes you.
Roddy, I got to interrupt you there. I spent most of my career at IBM, so I really resent those statements. You know how many $80 steaks I purchased?
Look, it helps. It builds relationships, but you can't just base it off of so-and-so vendor took me to dinner and we had a nice bottle of wine and they're my friend. You still have to run it through the ringer and run through the process of making sure that you're doing some due diligence with them and that they're checking off those boxes and that you don't have too much overlap in vendors with controls. And it's a dance, man. People try to make it into a science, and I'm like, no, man, it's like a dance. Sometimes you lead, sometimes your partner leads, and sometimes there's just a group of you just listening to Lil Boosie. It's just this dance is just all over the place, man,
So I'm curious. You said aligning to a standard a few times in just that response, and how there's overlap of controls. Okay, so something I'm doing, and shout out to CyberQP, we are doing a webinar on this topic, is that we believe vendors need to start aligning to controls. Oh, you got a QP shirt on?
I got my CyberQP Cybersecurity Hero shirt on.
There we go.
So I'm wearing it right now. So good shout out.
Yeah. All about CIS.
Yep.
And so what we're presenting on is, we talk about MSPs. You need to align to a standard. You have to do this. You should have been doing this for years, right? But what's not really talked about is the vendor themselves. They don't necessarily make it easy for that MSP to align to a standard because they don't know where they sit in the CIS controls in whatever other framework. So could you kind of talk a little bit towards this? What do you think vendors need to do? Do they need to change, or do MSPs just need to know where their vendor fits?
I mean, this goes back to the due diligence process on the MSP side of saying, hey guys, where do you fit? I follow CIS, or I follow NIST 800-171, or I follow NIST CSF, or ISO 27001. Where do your product fit in with my controls, right? And that's a question you have to ask, and that's a maturing of both sides, the vendor side and a maturing of the MSP side, to be able to ask those questions. I wish I could go into more detail on that, but like vendors do have a responsibility of making sure that they inform their MSPs of how they map to certain control frameworks. It's going to happen. It has to happen. I think you can see that more as CMMC starts to get pushed down into the vendor space and into the MSP side from whenever the DOTD decides to finalize everything and say, this is it, guys, take off. And based on the conversations I had at IT Nation, like they're getting close to it. And I think based on a conversation I had with Miss Joy, like they're gonna standardize on 800-171 revision 2, and just for now,
from Summit 7.
Yeah, and we're gonna boom. That's gonna be it. So when you start to see that, I think you're gonna have to have like, what do my tools touch? What do they do? What do they do inside your environment? What controls do we map to, so that you can better map that down to your CMMC controls as well? So it's gonna happen by hook or by crook, how we get those that maturity going. But the industry is 100% moving in a maturity, like in a more mature manner. And we need it. We 100% need it.
I thought Rich was going to chime in something, but I think he froze mid-thought.
It was such a powerful thought that the internet locked up at his house.
It wasn't ready.
There he is. Rich is back now. There you are.
I just blew up my bandwidth there with my thought. Anyways, Roddy, the last time you were on, episode number 2, you and I were both coming off the PAX 8 conference, which had a really big buzz around CIS at the event with all the MSPs there, and they're starting to execute on some of the product mappings in their dashboard to CIS controls and so forth, which is super exciting. What was the buzz like at IT Nation? Did you hear much about CIS in particular?
Yeah, I mean, there's I spent a lot of time in my booth talking with people, and the conversation has been around like, what's next for us, right? There was a couple of conversations. One of the big ones around IT Nation was the amount of buyers in this space looking for MSPs, but not enough sellers. So there is M&A, like there's a lot of that's going on. There's a lot of buyers and not enough sellers. That was some shocking news I got from that. The talk of robotic process automation, like making sure that the stuff that you can control in an automated fashion is controlled, so you don't have human errors. And then the other part was like, hey, there's a lot of talk about standardization and self-regulation going on, because we don't want outside parties, right, determining how we protect companies. Like, I love insurance people, gotta have them. Shouldn't be talking about, they shouldn't be dictating cybersecurity standards to us, because they're I don't want to speak in generalities, but I will. They're there for a profit, and they're there to drive the ability for them to have less payouts. Which
and all
security, I guess security and compliance does this, this weird wavy thing, and I'd rather us figure out as a industry, how do we want to do this, right? Like I bumped into Wayne Selleck with CompTIA, and they were talking about their Trustmark. I'm going to draw a blank on it right now, but Trustmark, right? Like, and the stuff they're doing. So like we're starting to see this sort of like intertwining of maturity and process. And I don't think we're ever going to have one ring to rule them all on frameworks, but I think the discussions are happening more and more and more, and it's going to drive vendors and MSPs just to ensure that they're on top of their game. And you just start seeing vendors getting picked on whether or not they are internally following some kind of compliance framework, and you can start getting those questions asked as well.
Yeah, CompTIA's Trustmark certification includes the CIS controls, which is pretty awesome. I need to actually schedule a meetup with Wayne and catch up on him with that.
Yeah. But yeah, that was it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to circle back. One additional thing, you kept on saying the industry is maturing a lot, and And this is something Matt Lee, speaking of PAX 8, also said to me. He laid out a pretty bold statement that in the next few years, even MSPs who have been historically way behind enterprise levels of security will either catch up or potentially even surpass in some cases. What do you think of that statement?
Bold statement,
bold?
Matt.
Too bold?
Bold statement, Matt. No, I love Matt Lee to death, and Matt Lee is, I look at him as a mentor figure too. We bounce a lot of stuff off of one another. He's not wrong, right? Like, we're gonna start to see that down push into the MSP industry, because like, look, small businesses are holding very sensitive data, just like large enterprises are, and they're being targeted just like large enterprises are. Look at MSPs and the attacks that we face. We can't even go back to the VSA attack. I bumped into Robert Coffee, who talks about his VSA breach and everything like that. That's the kind of stuff that scares the shit out of you. Sorry, I don't know if LinkedIn's going to bleep that one out, but but like, we're starting to see that it doesn't matter.
No delay.
Yeah. It doesn't matter your size. It's going to be, you have to have those same level of protections, because you may be holding 5 million sensitive records, but you may be holding 50,000 sensitive records, and that's going to, it's going to be a process of how do we make sure that those records are protected from people.
Yeah, and it just doesn't stop. I mean, every week we're hearing of some place or other that are losing those records, being exfiltrated, being held for ransom or whatever, disruptive in general. And Roddy, back to your conversation about regulation and the insurance industry and so forth. I couldn't agree more. The insurance industry is 100% about profit, and they're maturing in their model. And unfortunately for regulation, all of that profit funds lobbyists in Washington, which drives the regulation. So the more money the more money they make, the faster regulation will arrive.
Yeah, their actuary data is getting better too. I mean, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, the amount of actuary data they had on breaches and cyber response and cost of breaches isn't nearly as where it is now. And it's going to continue that actuary data is going to continue to get better. Right? Like, the automobile industry took decades for us to get that data, right? So they can set your auto insurance rates correctly. So that data is going to get more mature and get a lot more precise. The flip side of that is, like, look at what the White House said back in February when they released their guidelines, their cybersecurity pillars. Like, one of them is they're going to be a backstop for cyber insurance companies. So, like FEMA, just like FEMA does with flood insurance. So how does that work? Like, there's a lot of, I don't know.
You want to find out.
Yeah, I want to find out. At the same time, I want to find out about it before it happens, like 6 months before it happens, to see if I need to, set up.
I mean, insurance companies, their general stance is, on pay out anything is no until you can prove otherwise. So those requirements loom.
Yeah, and pulling it back to controls, like, for someone who's had to go to court and like defend actions and defend things, if you have a jury, or if it's a judge and you have to, like, you have a defense or a plaintiff attorney or whoever you're facing trying to grill you, the worst thing you can say is that, why'd you take this action? And you go, felt like the right thing to do. Like, it sounds really bad, but if you can say, like, hey, we follow CIS controls, and Control 8.2 says X, Y, and Z, and we implemented that based on this risk that we felt that was the organization, or we didn't implement it because the company said that when we addressed the risk, it wasn't that big of a risk, and sorry, we didn't properly, that risk always exists, but it wasn't properly maybe explained, or maybe the company just had some misguided risk there that they accepted. So, like, but just talking about it in a court, right, like, makes you seem like you took some kind of responsibility, right, that you were prudent in your actions. And it's a game changer, especially when you're getting sued. And it's the difference between, as I always say, the difference between having to pay out $100,000 and paying out $10,000 is whether or not your actions were respected and prudent.
And I think that really goes into those questions being asked from MSP to the vendor, right? Those questions are being forced to mature because they're now having to attest and prove that they're doing X, Y, and Z, right?
A lot
So
more.
yeah,
A lot more. And look at like what the Department of Justice is doing now with false claims acts, right? Like look at what the SEC is doing with SolarWinds. Like those are not just one-offs. Those aren't just one-offs. That is the tipping point. Like I had a post the other day on LinkedIn. Yeah, I had a post on LinkedIn the other day that's like, hey, if SolarWinds goes the way SEC wants it to, the SEC wants it to, you're now going to have the I don't use the word jurisprudence, but you now have the case law, or you have the whatever. I'm not an attorney. Yeah, you have the precedent. There you go. You have the precedent, right? That cybersecurity is as important, or good cyber hygiene is good, or as important as good financial hygiene, and that's a game changer.
That'd be a hell of a statement to get out there.
And then, so what does that trickle down to? So like in Louisiana, we have the Office of Financial Institutions, right? And they, the AG here in Louisiana can sue on behalf of them if you violate that. So like, will that trickle down to the states now? Then the states will start suing financial institutions that don't have good cyber hygiene and cause breaches, or have breaches that result from poor cybersecurity hygiene.
Public risk, right?
Yep. There you go.
Yeah. So, keeping on this maturity topic, you recently switched from being a CISO of a mid-size MSP, right? And now you have joined what we call the dark side, aka the vendor side.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you a question
steaks,
here.
Roddy. You ready to buy some steaks or what?
So Galactic doesn't let me have a company credit card, so it's not gonna happen. They're just like, we know, we've seen your bar tabs. So
yep. That's what happens.
I mean, look, it's one of those things. So like,
well, I'm curious what's changed, Roddy. I mean, these you used to be maturing as an MSP yourself and asking vendors these questions, and now you're on the receiving end. So I guess more of a broad understanding, with your vendor and MSP hat on, what does it mean if you're talking to a vendor and you don't know how you align to a framework, or don't know how, like you don't have an appropriate answer to something that really the vendor should know, right? Yeah. I guess first part of the question is, are you prepared to answer a question like that for Galactic, and how important is it that you have that ready?
So, and Roddy, maybe just update everyone on exactly what you're doing now too, because I don't know if we got into that.
Oh yeah, so let me start off with what I actually do now. So
sorry for jumping the gun. I was excited.
So I moved from the MSP I worked at, like Zach said, to the vendor side with Galactic Advisors as a security advisor. So I help our partners align to whatever frameworks they want to, help their clients do like compliance as a service, VCSO services, like helping build those products out if you've never done one or you want to scale them. We also do pen testing as a service. So that's the dime store tour of what we do. My role is educational, helping you support our PSMs on the technical side, helping going to conferences, doing speaking engagements. Like you'll find me at Exchange or Next Gen, usually doing some boardrooms or having discussions with people. Just having those real big discussions. Like one of the things that Bruce McCulley, who's the owner of Galactic, one of his goals is he wants to help protect 1 million people. Right, and that's something I want to buy into. Like, instead of helping just one MSP build out their cybersecurity practice and make it better, can I do 100? Right, and that's the And look, Zach, at the end of the day, I get paid, but I don't do it for the paycheck, man. I don't always do it for the paycheck.
Right? You do it for the stakes.
I do it because, like, look, like, let's get a little sentimental here. I understand the needs of people and want to make sure that business owners really don't sometimes understand risk the way they should. And if I can help 100 MSPs or whatever that number is, help those other business owners and help them sleep easier at night, like that's really where it's at. And at the same time, like move our industry forward a little bit. Like that's the gist of it. And that was the role I was giving at Galactic, was to help do that. And yeah.
That's awesome. And it takes so many of us, and And I do believe, and I praise CyberQP along with ourselves. Like, I do believe vendors, and hearing what you just said about Galactic, it sounds like a lot of vendors are stepping up and answering those harder questions, or what we think are foundational questions, honestly. But
Yeah.
being more prepared and being more ready. So that's awesome to hear Galactic's on the same trend, and you're now going to be a louder voice for our side.
Louder and more obnoxious, I think, is the route I want to go.
You are posting a little bit more on LinkedIn lately, Roddy. You had a pretty stellar jacket post, in my opinion, went viral.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, here's the deal, right? Like, if you go fishing, right? You go bass fishing, the shiny lure gets the bite. So I'm just out there. I'm catching bass, man. That's all I'm doing.
Hey, Zach, let's recognize Eric's comments, which I think are quite valid in the chat. And Eric, yeah, we probably do beat up on the insurance companies a little bit more than we should. And you're right; they do provide a valuable service. And to your point, Eric, they do aggregate a lot of information, and do have kind of deep insight into what's happening in these breaches and so forth. So they do play a valuable role. And thank you for the comments that.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I want to say Eric's 100% right. Like, we're taking pot shots at the insurance company, but as someone who had insurance company clients, they're extremely important. And the data, Eric, let's not be nice to them either. Yeah, no. Like, we're not going to be, because like, look, there's a good and bad there. I'm really interested to see if I can ever find some actuary data from them that I can glean and kind of read through and see, because they do provide trends and information they're seeing, and they're usually the ones that get called when a breach happens. So like, they do provide some valuable insight. But I also want to touch on Eric's other comment about the enterprise, because he said their environments are much smaller. Small environments also can move a lot faster, so they can adopt a lot quicker. Like, enterprises sometimes take a long time as well to adopt new solutions. That's why, you look at like patching a FortiGate, right? That has a vulnerability. I always pick on FortiGate. We were a Fortinet shop. We had FortiGate, but we patch regularly. But like, if you have a fleet in your enterprise, you're trying to figure out, oh man, does this update break something that's critical to the environment? You're going to take your time to patch while there's a vulnerability sometimes. Whereas in a small 10-person law firm, we're just going to patch, right? And like, if content filtering stops working, who cares, right? It's you get a lot more flexibility. And I'm not saying that's a great process to go through, and I'm simplifying it a lot. But like, the process to do some of those things is a lot easier in smaller environments. Like, I can go replace a whole fleet of workstations in a 20-person law firm in like a few weeks, as opposed to like replacing a whole fleet at an enterprise environment. Like, it takes a lot of careful planning and long-term planning. And I think there's some truth there that we can surpass enterprise. I love to hear Matt. I'm going to pick Matt. I'm going to pick on Matt Lee next time I see him. Like, hey,
if he's around, we'll bring him up right here on live webinar.
Matt, if you're out there, comment.
I just emailed him because I gave him a shout out last week.
Good, honestly, Eric, I may have to ping you after and get you on the show. I've been wanting to touch base and hear your thoughts on some of these configurations too. So appreciate you being here. But Roddy, let's kind of shift gears. I do want to give one more chance to kind of summarize the experience at IT Nation one more time. So you did talk about the conversations you had and kind of what you heard. Is there any other major highlights or keynotes that you really saw and just, I need to share this, that it happened?
Yeah. So I did have a moment whenever I'm gonna draw a blank on the guy's name. It was the guy from the Savannah Bananas that went and
Yep.
Roddy, you're gonna have to restart that answer there. Your bandwidth disappeared.
Converting your clients into
Roddy, your amazing thought blew up your bandwidth.
Yeah, sorry about that.
You're good now.
Yeah, but like Savannah Bananas guy. Yeah, he talked about creating fans, and he told his stories of it while I was in the little breakout area with it. But it was a really good conversation. And then again, like what Empath is doing with Wes Spencer and Alex Farling and Kyle Christensen and them are doing with Empath and Rejection Con. Like, that's gonna be some good stuff. I think they're on the verge of some greatness there as well. Shout out to Wes and them. There's some really good thought leaders, especially like talking about all the other soft things. We talk about like tech and talk about building frameworks, sometimes we figure about them mental health side of things and that we should have for one another in the industry. And they kind of bring that back, like it was funny. I don't know if you saw the picture from Wes's LinkedIn, but it's a picture of him giving his breakout, and everybody had shirts that said "Not Wes Spencer" on it, and so he was like, that was just their thing of messing with him.
I didn't read the shirt, but I saw the photo.
Yeah, it's like everybody has like these red shirts on, and
Yep.
the front of them say "Not Wes Spencer" on it. So
He's been on the live stream.
Yeah, he was scheduled to be on there, and then he had another speaking conflict, so I actually need to reschedule Wes to hop on. But no, you brought up something really important, Roddy, and we do have Thanksgiving and the holiday season coming up. We talk about trade shows. It's awesome learning new tech. It's awesome getting these key nuggets, but a lot of it is just networking and getting to have that release. I actually shout out to myself. I went to the Tech Degenerates happy hour for the first time. And there is quite some releasing conversations in there. You just get to rant and be with friends and just talk candidly to each other. So I'd love to just kind of hear from you, Roddy. You're a family man. You got your own couple daughters. What would you say about taking breaks and really prioritizing your health in the holidays this year?
Yeah, man. The holidays affect people differently. Some people it energizes them, and some people de-energizes them. I just say protect your time. Talk to people. There's always someone that'll hear you out if you're feeling down or if the holidays get you down. Man, talk to somebody about it. Go seek a professional or talk to a good friend. Go have lunch or whatever that looks like for you. Protect your time. And I always tell people, don't feel like you are expected to be something that, you don't feel is right. So if you want to go to one person's Thanksgiving dinner and that's it, hey man, do it. If you need to take a break, go take a break. Don't protect your mental health, man. Because if you're not yourself, if you can't be yourself, you can't be good to others, right? If you can't be good to yourself, you can't be good to others. So be good to yourself first. Hey, reach out, right? I'll even take a random LinkedIn message if you want and just talk about your issues. I'll listen. I'll listen.
That's one thing I think many of us in the IT space can do. We can always listen. Any best practices to kind of share how you get your release, after a long day or long week? And any recommendations on what you do?
Rage yoga. That's all that's
I love it.
Listen. We were actually talking about that in one of our Discord chats. I was like, we did rage yoga years ago, and it was like you scream and you yell, and I was like, Dracula by Rob Zombie was playing while we were doing it, and there's drinking afterwards, and I was like, do those things that bring you joy. I always like to say, think about those things that fill your cup up, and try to keep it as topped up as you can. But whatever it is, my thing is, I'll go work out, right? If I'm feeling down, I'm just gonna go to the gym. I'm just out of office and teams, nothing clear. I don't have anything to do. I'm just gonna go take an hour to myself, right? Sometimes it's all it is. Or I like to volunteer, so I'll do some volunteer time or schedule some volunteer time because it kind of fills my cup back up. So
you got some fundraisers going on right now too.
Yeah, you got all kind of fun stuff going on. And I was a shoe guy for Big Brothers Big Sisters, so we were fundraising there, and just
excellent.
Tons of things going on.
Yeah, I think personally I might try to plan a last minute trip here and do a little traveling. That is refreshing for me personally.
Yeah, for sure. Just do whatever fills your cup up, man. Don't feel like you just gotta trudge through and it's gonna get better. It never, it might in some people's instances, but I always say if you gotta tell people no, man. I had the best advice from one of my buddies a few weeks ago, and he was just like, hey man, I have a problem with telling people no sometimes. I need to say yes to things that matter. And I'm not, Zach, I'm not telling you that because I couldn't tell you no. I really want to be
a third time. I really want to be
here. But he told me this. He's like, every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. So if I said, if just come in here, doing this. So instead of being here, I'm saying no to my normal lunchtime, right? Yep. But so you have to think, or I'm saying no to time with my kids if I do something in the afternoon. So when you say yes, it's really saying no to other things. So you have to, if you frame it that way, saying no means you're saying yes to opening your time to go do those things that matter to you. So, and look, if people get upset with you because you told them no, I wouldn't rely too heavily on that. The people who care about you, if you say no, because you just out of pocket or whatever, you got some other things you want to do, they'll respect you for that.
And I love Degley's comment as well. I mean, it's definitely something that needs to become part of the culture. It's starting to be talked about, but
it is
like most things, like security, a lot of it comes top down. You got to get the executive level buy-in to really prioritize and encourage this.
Yeah. If you don't know Degley's pretty awesome. I'll tell you that.
Give Degley a highlight. Give
Degley a highlight.
Screen.
Put him on the screen.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad we got to have that topic, and thanks for introducing IT Nation to those of us who couldn't make it. I do intend to be there next week. Appreciate you being here, Eric.
Thanks, Eric.
Let's get into today's topic. So obviously this is a very heavy educational webinar series. We love to banter back and forth for the first half, but we are here to maybe earn some continuous learning credits for some people. So let's get into these settings, and we have a fun topic today. So we're going to be covering 4 sections, and one of these sections is going to be next generation CIS recommendations. I'll let Rich introduce that in a moment. But before we get into that directly with the setting recommendations, Roddy, do you mind just calling out some of these MITRE attack techniques and at a high level describe what they are, if that's all right?
Yes, I'm a pick a few because let's go data exfiltration via notification sometimes. So this can be handled, I guess, a couple of different ways, Rich. The thing that pops in my mind when we talk about that is error messaging sometimes can produce information you don't want them to see. So I've seen some error messages where it will tell you a ton of information. So if you can generate tons of error messages, you can glean enough information from a system to know how the internals work. So for example, if I type in, a username and password combination, it pops out, it says username or Bergeron not found. Well, then I know the username's wrong, right?
Right.
That's a really simple, information, but
relevant, right? You don't think of that being a vector.
Phishing attacks keep getting more sophisticated, and now what people will do is they'll find compromised accounts that might be very old, and so what they'll do is they'll just send a quick email, "Hey, what's up?" and not really say anything else from some random email address, and then they're just checking to see if the email account is active, and it's part of a phishing process.
Yeah, think about the bounce back notification. Does it say do you send one back that says that account doesn't exist? So we automatically, so that's it's a give and take there, right? And same thing, man in the middle attacks, that's a fun one. If you're a red teamer and you use something like a burp suite or something like that, and you're ingesting data going to the website, altering it before you send it to the website, or you're taking that data in, that's, red teamers love them some burp suite, man. I was talking with some guys this week, I had 3 tools. I had a coding environment, right? Whatever my preferred flavor of code was, if it was Python or Rust or whatever, burp suite and a notepad to take notes in, and that was their red teaming tools they use. It's the same thing.
It's interesting you mentioned Python, Roddy, because it is very common, and another recent attack vector is attacking the Python development environment with malicious software, where you add maybe a plugin or something, and it's, all of a sudden doing unexpected things in your code base.
Yeah.
I mean, that could be the unauthorized code execution, right? That one's on the screen here, close to it.
It could fall maybe in between.
Yeah. Yeah. We start talking about just even credential dumping, right? Like a Mimikatz type deal where you're dumping, dumping LSAS or if they have a SAM database or whatever, and you're just dumping all those credentials. And then what do you do after you dump the credentials? Most people, I'd say most environments I've run across usually use the same local admin user account and passwords. And then you can, once you dump those credentials, if their passwords are reused across the board, then I can spread laterally depending on what ports I find open, if RDP is open or file sharing is open. And I've played around with this before, where it's I get a local admin account. It's the same local admin account across all workstations, and then I can move laterally if file sharing is open. I can run psexec or something to that effect and try to get access to remote machines or run arbitrary code, things like that. So it's pretty interesting how that works, and how those playbooks that you see coming from some of those APTs work. I'm constantly like looking at stuff that, what like Black Cat or what some of those other guys are doing out there. Ones I've run across in some of the incident response I used to do, just pulling all that stuff together. Like, how did they get in? What do they do?
Yeah.
What's their playbook? It's pretty interesting because a lot of those playbooks never change. They change minorly, but like the major way they get in and like all the big parts hardly ever change. So pretty interesting stuff.
I've posted this a couple times, but CISA and NSA did a case study or an article, and the number one risk to your assets is leaving them in default configurations.
Yep.
Talk about knowing the lay of the land, right? If you already know it's a default workstation, pretty big issue. Yeah.
Yeah, I had one time. I was doing a vulnerability in pen test, and man, like I hit a port on one of their IP addresses, and I was like, it was the login for the copier, and the login for the copier was like it was a Canon copier, so I think it was like admin, and then the password was like 0123456789, and I got in, and I was like, well, this is easy. The issue was they did scan to email. And you know what I found inside their SMTP settings? A random email relay that we could not identify. Yeah. I did the same thing with a Sonic wall I went to for a doctor's office, and they were like they had some theft of some credit card information, and they were like, we got a credit card. What happened? Well, the firewall was routing like certain DNS stuff to a DNS server in Germany, and I was like, I don't know what this is, and basically intercepting certain requests and things like that from their Sonic wall because they had remote administration turned on from the outside world and admin as the username and password. So,
hey, Roddy, can you go back to that printer example? We just had a printer session last week. So what you described, would that enable someone to just, kind of route those print jobs in a kind of a stream somewhere else?
So what's going on was they were doing scan to email. So they were scanning documents in, and those emails were going to an unknown SMTP server that then was then turn around and forwarding those emails back out to them. Yep. So we were just like, yeah, this is odd. Huge, and they didn't know why that was going on, and I was like, well, we're gonna turn off the ability to scan the email while we figure this out. But yeah, no telling how long that had been going on for. So and this was I don't want to say too much. This was an insurance company, let's just call them that. So no telling what they were scanning into email, and what was going out and being either sucked in or looked at. It could have been financial information, could have been people's bank information. It could have been whatever they were scanning into email. So it was pretty nasty stuff. But again, like, why was that printer exposed to the outside world? The best thing we could come up with was that at one point that was an old server IP address, and then they reused it for the copier, and no one ever closed the port off. And so that copier with its default username and password was exposed to the internet.
Yep. So, I think that's.
So if you own that copier, watch last week's session.
This was like 7 years ago, so it's done a lot better.
Probably on the roadmap for updating soon.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the more interesting things that we found over at Senteon, because when we onboard new MSPs and new partners, one of the things we look for is every single setting that has been modified from the default state. And a lot of the time, these findings that we present, they remember doing it, but they have since moved on from the application that needed it to have access or needed that GPO to be a certain state. That application is gone, so they just left a vulnerability available when it wasn't needed anymore. Yeah. And that happens almost every time we onboard someone.
Yeah, so fear of pretty breaking something. If they don't want to turn it off because they're fearful of breaking something, right? Even though it's really not even doing anything.
Yeah, it was used for an application, and they forgot why it was an accepted risk. It wasn't documented, and so when they got rid of the application, they kept the risk. Wasn't necessary.
We gotta list those dependencies, right?
Yeah, man. What was what's the term we always use? Tech debt, right? Like
tech debt. Yeah.
So if you're on the call and you hear the word, you know that means you have to do shots right now. That was the thing we used to do. Like every time we heard tech debt at a conference, we were like, you gotta take a shot. So, old tech debt, man. Good old tech debt.
All right, we do
tech debt. So I'm just getting some people drunk out there.
For everyone playing.
Everyone playing the game at home.
All right, we do have about a dozen settings to cover.
Yeah.
These are going to be a little bit more in depth. So, Rich, in like a quick 1 minute summary, we're going to be talking about some of these higher level settings, next generation. Really quick, 30 seconds, 1 minute. Can you explain why these are at a, or what these are and why they're ranked as a next generation recommendation?
Yeah, for sure, Zach. Thank you. So the CIS benchmark settings in general are broken out by profiles. So the level 1 profiles are designed and recommended as such because their implementation will generally not affect workload adversely, meaning it's not going to break your apps generally. The level 1 CIS benchmark settings, always testing is important. But then when we move down into the level 2 settings, it's more of a defense in depth kind of reach, where once you've kind of completed your level 1 benchmark settings, you can start, going further if you have workload that requires extra levels of defense in depth. It depending on the risk that you're protecting and the risk you're willing to accept, you may or may not need level 2 settings. Level 1 is our recommendations for everybody, but depending on the nature of your the risk you're protecting, you may want to have a combination of level 1 and level 2 settings. We also have benchmarks, just to kind of close out that thought around STIGs as well. I don't think they're necessarily represented here. The NG or next generation Windows settings, they're considered a kind of more of a defense in depth profile in general. And then we also have the BitLocker profiles too for organizations using BitLocker. So, to secure, once you kind of understand where your risk lies and where your most important information is, you can use a combination of these different profile levels of the CIS benchmarks to properly secure your environment against most common threats in the landscape.
Yep. And that's an awesome summary going into this. So Roddy's going to be put under the fire with some of these settings because I will say majority of MSPs aren't going to be doing this, and it might be something to strive for if you are working in those highly regulated. Joy might be trying to hit these, the highly regulated CMMC.
Yeah,
but
that's a thing too, like risk management, right? Like is the juice worth the squeeze?
Exactly.
Protection, right? Like that's a huge part of this.
Yep. So let's dive into these. We're going to start with the easier ones, and then we're going to get to the next generation ones. So the first one here, we just talked about notifications, but again, really quick, just explain what this setting is and why it's important to make sure these are off.
Yeah. So you get a lot of alerts on your computer. So which ones are important or not, right? Like same thing if you ever build out a SOC or you build out a new tool that does alerting, like what is pertinent to you so you don't get alert fatigue. Because if you get constant pop-ups on your machine about stuff that's going on in the background, you're going to miss the ones that are really important. So tune your alerting is extremely important.
And Roddy, we were talking about mental health. I mean, this actually is part of that.
If you've ever looked at your ticketing system when it alerts trigger and you have a bad alert that triggers and you see 160 new tickets in your queue, immediate
good for your blood pressure, is it?
Cortisol levels shoot through the roof,
Yeah, right. No one needs that.
Yeah. So tune your alerting in general, and keep the noise down to stuff.
And one more thing to expand on this, the CIS benchmarks are all proactive, preventative steps to make the attack path harder, make it more difficult for the attacker to be successful. Another benefit with this setting and many of the CIS benchmarks is this will also make it so these notifications in this respect to the GPO aren't going to pop up on the end user end, forcing them to get distracted, like Roddy said at the MITRE attack techniques, making them read something they shouldn't be reading, right? These are distractions. So by hardening your systems, you're not only making it safer, you're making the end user more operationally efficient, and then in turn, ROI for that MSP.
Yeah. If you're asking your users to constantly click on stuff and agree to it, you're just detuning their sensitivity, and they're just going to click on everything.
Yeah.
Yep.
Who reads their TOS when they install software, right? Like nobody. Like you scroll through it and accept it. Like
All right, let's go to this next setting. So,
yeah.
including a command line in process creation events is set to enabled. This to me sounds like it's going to be giving more information, which is usually beneficial in our area. But tell us about it.
Oh man, good old threat hunting, right? Like, so you don't know what you don't know, and if you are looking for a specific issue, or if you're doing threat hunting and you don't have the information to properly do a proper threat hunt, you're missing out, right? So this is a double-edged sword too. Like, how much data are you collecting as well, right? That's why like services that offer like data lakes and things for you have to manage how much data is important, because if certain information that goes on inside your network is pertinent to a threat hunt, you want to make sure you have that information, and you want to be able to audit it, right? So like visibility into what's going on inside of your network, inside of your computers, and the ability to audit those processes are just as important as hardening a machine. You need to know what's going on so that you can always go back and say, hey, this is this information was pertinent in my threat hunt, because when they did this, they also did X, Y, and Z. And this goes beyond just this one
Roddy,
item.
Can you just expand just very briefly on putting this type of information into a data lake? Maybe something that you don't look at, on an ongoing basis, or maybe you look at it once in a while, but certainly certain priceless information at the right time.
Yeah. So like data laking things, just having a massive set of data is important for like SOCs, right? Because you never know what information you can glean that ties non-malicious like singular non-malicious activities to a chain that tells you this is malicious, right? So data laking, the ability to hold massive amounts of data so you can do that level of threat hunting is important sometimes, because sometimes you do have to get into the minutia to say like, man, like why did calc.exe spawn a PowerShell prompt? Like
a little scary.
That may not trigger things on a daily basis, but if you see like 2 a.m. RDP login session, then XYZ happened, and then calc spawned PowerShell.exe, and then my credentials got dumped. Like you can chain all that together, and or maybe that PowerShell command then tried to pull Mimikatz down. So like you chain all that together, and you say like this is highly malicious, Yeah. So just giving a broad example.
That's a really good, great question to expand on that, Rich. All right.
Yeah.
Keeping on to the momentum. This next one here, you did a little education before the show with me on, but encryption Oracle remediation. So making sure this is enabled to force updated clients. And if we can highlight that slide.
Yeah.
Cool.
This has nothing to do with Oracle, the company. I just want to make that clear. Or it could be, but the Oracle attacks, right? Which is like, can I put this? Let's like gleaming information, just like the Oracle. Like you'd go to the Oracle and be like, hey, is it right to attack Athens right now? And they would tell you yes or no. So like you gleaming information. So there was an attack in Windows against RDP, specifically Cred SSP, which, if I recall correctly, that's like they handle credential. They're like the security or credential security manager for RDP. You're able to do things like impersonate the way that Cred SCP would say this thing's authenticated, and then run arbitrary code. So you want to make sure that encryption levels are high enough where people can't break like the encryption chain in RDP or whatever, and then be able to sniff certain pieces of it and then use that to then like do like replay, or not replay, do like a code execution that they normally couldn't do. So you want to just make sure your encryption levels are high enough, and that the clients support modern encryption standards, and that you enforce those encryption standards so that that type of data can't be sniffed and broken easily.
That's spot on. Goes right with the why it matters on this slide, right? You're forcing those stronger encryptions. You're not allowing the less secure one. So perfect.
And if someone out there wants to like chime in on like Oracle attacks that are more knowledgeable than me on it, please do so. That's my dime store tour of Oracle attacks.
That's a good one. We'll keep an eye out for comments. All right, let's get to this next one. Remote host allows delegation of non-exportable credentials. So set to enabled. So I believe this is saying making sure non-exportable credentials cannot actually be exportable. Sounds like a good idea to me.
Well, and you also want to have trusted systems too, that you can maybe send it to. So you don't want to just allow anybody to say, hey, send me, I want to send these non-exportable credentials to just any host. Maybe you want to make sure that you fine tune that. So like if you start talking about like zero trusts, like which hosts do you trust to allow credential exporting from, or do you not want to allow it at all? So there's a way you can export credentials and send them to a non-trusted host, and then an attacker on that host could then get access to those credentials in a nutshell.
Yep. All right. The rest of the settings today are all going to be about virtualization-based security. So I think if we didn't already, we're definitely getting into those next generation recommendations now. So this is definitely something, again, identify your risk, know if it's something you need to prioritize and understand. But in a lot of cases, these are labeled next generation because only the highest regulated businesses really need this. But let's go to that next slide.
And they do have the potential to maybe break things.
Right. A lot of potential to break things and disrupt workflows. So be very cautious if you are looking to do settings like this. But Roddy, kick us off. What is virtualization-based security?
Yeah, so VBS is basically like you're turning on features that allow you to harden systems. So like UEFI guard, credential guard, those types of things, right? Which you're isolating certain processes into a virtualized environment so they can be executed without, in case the host OS is compromised in some way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. So you are doing certain core processes like memory allocations or getting access to user creds. Like those things are put into an isolated environment, and then the output of that is given back to the OS. So that, it's kind of like putting things into a mystery box, them happening, and then there's an output from that mystery box that the OS then can have access to, so that the OS doesn't have like the full string of access. So in case the root OS is compromised, there's still something. So like this is in very high security environments, right? Mm-hmm. Like you want to make sure that core processes, even if the root OS is compromised or partially compromised, that it doesn't compromise all core processes. So
that makes sense.
Very high level, very nebulous, but like that's in a nutshell.
But it's just making sure the output is there, making sure nothing can be possibly decrypted or be compromised. It's making sure only that.
Yeah, and if you want to really get into like, we talk about encryption at rest and encryption in transit. If you want to talk about encryption in use, it's not theoretical in a sense, but it's not something you're going to run across normally. Like you can start kind of delving into that a little bit of like, how do you protect data during use? So it's encrypted through the whole life cycle too. So you can start talking about that a little bit. And that's, we can write a
whole episode.
Yeah, a whole series. A whole series. So it's, yeah.
All right. Stuff. Well, with that in mind, let's dive into a handful of these settings to make sure virtualization-based security is actually set up properly if you do choose to use it. So don't feel like you have to spend too long on these slides because, again, high level is the goal here.
Yeah, so secure boot, right? Like if your boot process is compromised, then the root OS is compromised too. So in a secure boot environment, you want to make sure that code sign, that nothing's tampering with those boot processes, because if you can inject malicious code in before things like antivirus or other system protections get put in place, then you're hosed to some extent. And then DMA protection, right? You want to make sure that that's like a type of side channel attack. So you can do things like inject a malicious driver, and then someone plugs in like a USB device that loads that driver. Since direct memory access bypasses certain protections for speedier processing of data, you can basically bypass some certain things, get access directly to memory, write yourself or execute code inside of the memory space, and that becomes a bit of a problem. And so that's a thing. I think in Windows 10 now, DMA protection is enabled in one of the feature updates, 1803 or 1805 or one of them. So if you're Windows 7 or Windows 8 user, good luck.
Update. That's not good luck. Update.
So, but yeah, DMA, like if you can protect, like it's a physical protection, or like turning off USB ports if you don't need to use USB ports, or if you have, I wouldn't even say USB ports, I'd say like lightning ports and
Bluetooth and whatnot and all that.
That's more for physical ports, but yeah, you could do it probably via Bluetooth as well.
If you're not using them, it's tech debt. Right, Roddy?
Yeah, it's tech debt. So like if you know secure physical environment, turn USB ports off if you don't need to use them, or restrict which USB devices can be used. Things like that, because DMA usually is done through direct port access.
All right, next setting here. Setting here. Going into what you just said about with UEFI. Or I'm sorry, never mind. Sorry, I skipped the slide. But virtualization-based protection of code integrity, enabled with UEFI lock.
Yeah. So I actually had to go look this one up because I was like, what the heck?
Tell
is
me,
UEFI
next
lock?
generation settings didn't just come naturally.
Yeah.
But yeah, research, Roddy. Look at you.
The research I did into it basically is like, so you have credential guard, but credential guard is done via registry setting. So how do you prevent someone from just changing that registry setting and to turn off credential guard? So UEFI lock basically puts some protections in place to prevent like someone remotely from being able to disable, or I say remotely, it could be from the host as well, but being able to turn off like credential guarding or credential guard in Windows. That's the 10-cent tour. Yeah.
Yeah, these settings are definitely.
I had to do some digging. I had to do some digging on that one because everything about it was very nebulous, and I was like.
Yeah. All right, let's get to this next one. If you're going to be using the UEFI lock, I feel like this next setting here also goes hand in hand, making sure that it is being required and checked that it's actually there. So
yeah, just for secure memory configuration, and I just FYI on this because this is something I actually played with. You got to have compatible hardware to make this work. So this is actually if you do not have hardware that supports the attributes table and I forgot what processors or whatever. It's like 7th or 8th generation Intel, or I mean, don't quote me on that.
Yeah.
But like, you have to have hardware that supports memory attribute tables, or so that protection. So just FYI.
All right. 2 more settings here, and we're right on time. So we budgeted time very well. So let's go into this next one here. Again, credential guard configuration, making sure this is enabled with UEFI lock.
Yeah,
sounds like right tied together.
Again, like when we talk about VBS, right? So the credential guard falls under VBS. So what you're doing is basically protecting user accounts from compromise by executing like the authentication piece, if I'm reading it correctly, and what I remember from my textbook studies at Hogwarts, there was it basically executes some of that credential unlocking, some of that credential information inside of a secure environment outside of the OS. So like basically spinning up a mini virtual machine or a mini virtual environment, executing that user authentication process inside of that, and then spitting back the results back to the OS so that the actual working of that process is protected.
Spot on.
So
and we got one
in essence. It's pretty cool if you can make it happen.
Yeah, I always liken it to like a black box that you don't know what goes on inside of it, and it spits out some information. It's basically that. So the OS doesn't know what's going on inside that black box.
Nice.
All right, last setting here, and you've definitely been talking about the secure launch and everything, and making sure it's all run before. So let's look at this last setting here, making sure that secure launch configuration is set to enabled.
Yeah, again, this is making sure that you have things like secure or signed code running at boot, and that nothing's interfering outside of that. Because again, if your boot process or anything that goes on before, like your Windows runtime environments start to like load security tools. If you're already compromised at that point, you can more easily bypass your security tools, or do things like run code at the kernel level and do some other funky stuff. There are things that protect against it, but like outside of like third-party tools, you want to make sure that those type of security hardening is being done.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you stepping up today, tackling some of these next generation settings. There's not too many.
Shout out to Animal. Shout out to Animal. He guides me. He's my spirit animal.
Hey man, he kept you focused today. You absolutely nailed it. There's not too many people I can go, hey, can you talk about these 10 granular settings that you've probably never touched and teach it as an SME? Thank you for taking the time to do that.
Nailed it.
I appreciate it. Hopefully it was good stuff that and if you don't like, here's the deal. We're all learning, right? Like don't be like, man, I wish I was as smart as Roddy, because guess what? I'm an idiot. So like, just man, wherever
This
you're
is
at,
going to
just
be
keep
your
learning every.
viral video. This session is going to be your
I hope so.
famous.
Yeah, man. I always tell people. I had a conversation with a guy today. Like, don't like peg where you're at in life based on how good someone else is doing. Because, like, man, I suck at musical instruments. Maybe you're great at it.
Same.
Like, don't. Yeah. So, don't come to these things feeling like you can't learn it, you can't do it or like you're not doing a great job because someone else understands these things or does through them. Like I said, I do some research to do some of these, so I learned from this. So it's just be yourself,
Roddy.
be great, be awesome, in
I
every
think
day.
I think that was the words of wisdom to leave the audience with. Roddy, do you want to do any additional just kind of thoughts on the topic or CIS as a whole? But love those words of wisdom.
Yeah, CIS, right? Like that was the framework we used at our MSP. We loved it. Start off simple, man. Like everybody starts a journey. You don't have to don't get overwhelmed with it. Just one chunk at a time, man. Move on through. We loved our CIS controls implementation. Made me sleep a little bit easier at night. And just start off with IG1. Pick some low hanging fruit and just work your way through it. Iterate. If you can't do it all at one time, don't eat the elephant, right? But it will get better. And one day you'll wake up and be like, yeah, all that's left is the tusks.
And it is iterative, right? It's a continuous process.
Yes, sir. 100%.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being a guest again. And if we can highlight back on these slides, we do this every single week. Thank you for everyone in the audience today. I do write a blog about this and a little carousel slide with the key points afterwards. So please follow this, keep engaged, keep these education sessions powerful for everyone. Next week, we do have Adam Evans coming back on. And Adam's going to have some exciting news to share as well in that session. And then we have a couple other David Kreitz and Ian Hooper to talk about some more settings. So only, I think, 5 more episodes to close out the year. And then season 2, still talking about workstations and servers, part 2. Soon enough, we're going to get to the 365 level and browser hardening settings, but really excited for what the series is becoming and the attention it's getting. So thanks for being part of it, Roddy. Awesome having you as a co-host, Rich. And if you can show this last slide, we're always happy to connect on LinkedIn. And if you did want to test out Senteon, we do assist with implementing, tracking changes, gap assessments, and everything around these recommendations. So scan the QR code. Would love to check it out. Subscribe to the newsletter, everything else around it. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and we will talk next week.